As more businesses reopen amid the coronavirus pandemic, companies are trying to shield themselves from potential liability suits by asking employees and customers to sign waivers saying they're not responsible for possible COVID-19 infections. And we're seeing this trend extend beyond the workplace as well. The Ohio State football team is requiring players to sign off knowing about the dangers and the possibility of getting sick, while the Trump campaign is asking attendees to sign waivers saying they will not sue ahead of the president's rally on Saturday. It is his first since the virus swept across the country. To talk more about these liability protections, let's bring in CBSN legal contributor Keir Dougall. Keir, critics say employees are especially at risk. They may be forced to choose between their health and their job. I note that there are a number of people that we've reported on that I know that have had family members who have gone into work knowing these risks and have contracted COVID-19, and some that have even passed away from it. Explain these waivers and explain, I guess my question is, do they trample on individual rights, but also what are the liabilities that companies or the Trump campaign or a store that asks somebody to come in knowing that we're in the midst of a pandemic, what the responsibility is of that company to protect their workers or to protect attendees at a rally?
Good morning, Vlad. That's a big question, and it's an important question right now. So you use the word trample. That's maybe too strong a word here, because waivers are voluntary. You don't have to sign them. But it's important to realize that when you do, you are potentially giving up some important rights. And these waivers are generally enforced across most of the country, but there are certain states that are resistant to them, that don't favor them, and that where they're not enforced. So, look, law students spend about a semester, a course, on a subject called torts, which covers this general area of law. And the idea is that people are supposed to act reasonably, take reasonable care to protect others from harm. And so, if you sign a waiver, and it's enforceable, what you're generally giving up is the right to go seek damages if you're injured because somebody wasn't using reasonable care. Generally, these waivers do not protect people if they act with greater intent, with more culpability. If they know about a risk and ignore it, or if they're acting intentionally or criminally, these waivers generally don't apply anywhere. But they're important, and they do put people to difficult decisions in the face of this real threat of a pandemic.
So, Keir, going to a rally is completely, optional, but going to work may not be. You could argue that it's optional, but if you got to put food on the table, it may not be optional. I'm curious about these sort of waivers that if, the individual says, I have to work, and so I'm accepting these risks, and they contract the virus, but then pass it on to, say, a family member. Can that family member then sue?
Yeah, so the waivers generally relate to the individual who's signed them. Generally, you can't waive away a family member's right, certainly if they're an adult. That's just not something that waivers do. So, a family member, if you could make the proof of causation, which is a sort of one of the difficult things in these lawsuits, if you can prove that your family member got it at work and you got it from their family member because they got it at work, you would theoretically have a cause of action if you could show that along that chain, reasonable care wasn't taken.
So just to be clear, Keir, can a company say to you, if you don't want to sign the waiver, you can't come to work and you can be fired, or is it that you just can't come to work? So
that's going to depend, I think, on state law, but certainly, employment is voluntary. And if if your employer's insisting on a waiver and you refuse to sign one, you're certainly at risk of being terminated. And then we'll get into questions about, whether you can collect unemployment insurance because you were fired or because you quit. And wrapped around these issues also, certainly for employees, is whether or not workers' compensation covers, an injury or catching the pandemic, the virus at your workplace. That varies by state law. There's not a lot, not the clarity that I would like to see there. And then, of course, we have questions about health insurance and whether or not individuals have the health insurance. Look, when people are injured or when they're sick, in a civilized society, an advanced society like ours, you would hope that there would be a way for people's injuries and illnesses to be cared for in a way that's efficient and makes sense.
So you talk about how these may vary from state to state because of the laws. Let's talk about what Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has been pushing, which is liability protections for certain industries. He's not calling it complete immunity, but some sort of protection. We know that there have been a number of laws successfully passed throughout the country to put a cap on just how much you can get in damages, whether a life has been lost or a leg has been broken. I'm wondering if we've seen this sort of broad protection that Mitch McConnell is floating. Have we seen that before?
Yeah, so the federal government and Congress has the ability to grant liability waivers through their power to regulate interstate commerce. And they've done it before. A couple of examples are for gun manufacturers and gun dealers. They have some limited liability protections for customers who use their products in a crime later. Internet providers have certain copyright infringement liability protection if they use certain procedures. So we've seen this before, and Congress has the power to do it. But it opens up a host of questions. If you grant national liability, the immediate questions are, who's going to set the standard of what reasonable care ought to be, what these different industries ought to do? If employees and customers are going to lose the right to sue under certain circumstances, is the government going to be able and going to actively enforce standards for the workplace and the business place that are going to be reasonably protective? And if these liability protections are in place, will it possibly backfire? Will customers and employees, we just discussed this, not want to come in? Also, an important question around this is, who is in a better position to address these risks? Is it the employers who generally control the workplace, or is it individuals and customers and workers? Who has the better ability to make those decisions and act on them? And a related question is, who can get insurance for these risks if you suffer injury?
Let me ask you this, Keir. Nursing homes have been especially hit hard by the pandemic. Some have even been accused of not being very transparent. There's a recent Washington Post article that highlights this issue, reporting about 20 states that have adopted some form of liability protections for nursing homes. So what recourse do family members have if they feel nursing homes are hiding or concealing information from them?
Right, and so this is a difficult question as well. So several states have provided some liability protection here for regular negligence and allow for lawsuits that are claiming gross negligence or more intentional conduct. But what happens is, if these protections are in place, it becomes more difficult to file a negligence lawsuit. And those lawsuits allow for discovery. They allow to issue subpoenas and to take witness testimony. So these protections can make it more difficult for family members to find out what actually happened to their loved ones in a nursing home if they're injured or if they die. If you can get access to medical records, that may help, but they may not be complete, or in a worst case scenario, they may even be falsified. So liability protections here are shifting costs and abilities between the players, that are, as we're all involved, between nursing homes, healthcare providers, patients, and families. in a way that, if you do it, you want to have it well thought out, and you want to understand what the consequences are.
All right, Keir Dougall, always great talking to you. Great conversation.
Thank you, guys.